Before there were pyramids, pharaohs, or temples that would become symbols of an entire civilization, there was a river. It cut through one of the harshest landscapes on Earth, creating a thin strip of life between two endless deserts. Thousands of years later, one of its kings would build a monument so enormous that it would outlive almost everything else he knew. Centuries passed, kings rose, dynasties disappeared, and Egypt kept going. When Hatshepsut ruled, Egypt was powerful enough to send ships beyond the Red Sea in search of gold, incense, and wealth from distant lands. She was not simply ruling a kingdom, she was projecting Egypt beyond its borders. When Akhenaten ruled, he tried to tear Egypt away from the gods it had worshipped for centuries. Old names were erased from stone. Old temples were abandoned. And for a moment, Egypt tried to become something completely different. Then a boy became king, and history almost forgot him. Until the world found what was waiting beneath the desert. A forgotten boy suddenly became one of the most famous pharaohs who ever lived. But Egypt had kings who did not need a tomb to be found. They built their legacy into the landscape. Under Ramesses, Egypt fought wars, controlled territory, and projected its power far beyond the Nile. His statues were enormous. His monuments were everywhere. His name was meant to survive forever. And then there was Cleopatra. But by the time she was born, Egypt was already ancient. The pyramids were already more than 2,000 years old. She was closer in time to the modern world than she was to the people who built the Great Pyramid. Khufu, Hatshepsut, Akhenaten, Tutankhamun, Ramesses, Cleopatra. 6 names that seemed to belong to one story, but they did not. They were separated by centuries, sometimes by more than 1,000 years. And yet the civilization kept changing without disappearing. That is the part people miss. Ancient Egypt was not one moment. It was a world that kept becoming something else. But before the pyramids, before the temples, before the famous kings, there were only villages beside a river. And even these villages were not one country. In the south, the Nile cut a narrow green path through the desert. In the north, the river spread out, divided into channels, and reached the sea. Different customs, different symbols, different crowns. They shared the Nile, but they did not share one crown. One river, 2 lands, one question. And somewhere in the south, a king was preparing to march north. He marched north, not to raid, not to take what he could carry and go home, the way Southern kings had done for generations. Narmer crossed into the delta with an army built to hold ground, not just take it. The Northern Kingdom wasn't ready for that kind of war. The details of the battle didn't survive, but the outcome did. It's carved onto a ceremonial stone pallet that still exists today. Narmer gripping a defeated northern king by the hair. Mace raised, one frozen moment of total command. It's the oldest image in human history of a ruler, completely, unmistakably in charge. But Narmer didn't burn the north down. He didn't need to. He took its crown, the tall red crown of Lower Egypt, and he placed it beside his own white crown of the south. Then he did something no one in the Nile Valley had ever done. He wore both, at once, combined into one. Two kingdoms as far back as anyone could remember. Two crowns. Two peoples who didn't fully trust each other. As of this moment, one. A new nation needed a new kind of ruler, not a chief, not a warlord, something closer to a god. Narmer's successors built on what he'd started. They founded Memphis, a capital city positioned deliberately at the exact seam between Upper and Lower Egypt. A statement in stone that the two lands were now permanently one. They developed the first true system of writing anywhere in Africa. Hieroglyphs, sacred carved symbols that could record a king's name, a god's title, a nation's laws, and they invented something the ancient world hadn't fully worked out yet. The idea that a king wasn't just a powerful man, he was a living link between people and gods. The Egyptians called it Ma'at, order, balance, truth. The pharaoh's entire job, his entire reason for existing, was to hold Ma'at together, keep the Nile flooding on schedule, keep the borders safe, keep chaos on the outside of Egypt's walls. The kings of this first dynasty weren't shy about proving it. A ruler named Den left behind the earliest image of a pharaoh wearing both crowns together in the same scene, striking down an enemy from the east. The same smiting pose Narmer had originated was now becoming a formula. A piece of royal branding repeated for the next 3,000 years. Not every transition of power was peaceful. Late in the second dynasty, a king associated with the god Seth, chaos and violence, the opposite of everything Ma'at was supposed to represent, took the throne, breaking with the tradition of kings aligning themselves with the falcon god Horus. It may have reflected a real civil conflict, a religious faction fight at the heart of the young state. His successor, Kasekemwi, reversed it, reuniting the country and, according to his own monuments, doing so through renewed bloodshed. Even a nation built on the idea of divine order, it needed force to hold that order together. For nearly 400 years, these two ruling dynasties held the fragile idea together. Royal tombs grew larger. Administration grew more complex. Scribes, a small literate elite, became essential to running a kingdom too large for any one man to oversee alone. But something was still missing. The tombs of these early kings were simple, mud brick structures, rectangular, built low to the ground. Impressive for their time, but not permanent, not eternal. Egypt hadn't yet built anything that could outlast memory itself. That was about to change. Instead of one flat mud brick mound, Imhotep stacked 6 of them, each one smaller than the last, rising in giant steps toward the sky. The result, the Step Pyramid of Saqqara, was the first large-scale stone structure in human history, not just in Egypt, anywhere on Earth. It worked. It's still standing, over 4,500 years later. And Imhotep's reputation grew so large that 2,000 years after his death, Egyptians were worshiping him as a god. His breakthrough set off something close to an arms race. Except the prize wasn't territory. It was eternity. Djoser's eventual successor, Sneferu, wanted a true pyramid, not a stepped one. And he was willing to fail as many times as it took to get there. His first attempt at Meidum began as a step pyramid and was converted partway through into a smooth-sided one. At some point, likely not long after completion, its outer casing collapsed, leaving behind the strange tower-like ruin that still stands in the desert today. His second attempt did something almost as strange while still under construction. Partway up, engineers realized the angle was too steep for the foundation to bear. So they changed the slope mid-build. The result is the bent pyramid, a monument that permanently shows its architects correcting a mistake in real time. The Red Pyramid, the first true smooth-sided pyramid ever finished successfully. 3 pyramids, 2 failures. One king who refused to accept it couldn't be done. Sneferu died having solved the problem, and his son inherited something no pharaoh before him had ever been handed. Engineers who already knew how, everything learned the hard way, was now just knowledge, proven, available, and the man who inherited it had no interest in building something as good as his father's. Khufu. He would raise the largest structure on Earth, and it would hold that record for the next 3,800 years. On the Giza Plateau, around 2560 BC, he built the largest pyramid that has ever existed, over 2 million limestone blocks, some weighing more than a small car, stacked with a level of precision that modern engineers still study with genuine disbelief. How did they do it? Without iron tools, without modern machinery, with rope, wood, copper chisels, sledges, boats, and an almost unimaginable amount of coordinated human labor. For centuries, the story was that this was built by slaves, whipped, chained, dying in their thousands under the lash. It isn't true. Archaeology found their town, bakeries, breweries, medical facilities, and proper burials for the men who died on the job, buried in the shadow of the thing they built, which is not what anyone does with slaves. These were organized crews, fed crews, workers rotating through the project in shifts, proud enough of their labor to leave graffiti bragging about their work gangs deep inside the pyramid. The pyramid was not simply a tomb. It was a demonstration of the state. The Nile was the highway. Stone arrived from quarries. Grain arrived from the countryside. Boats moved materials. Scribes recorded supplies. Foremen organized crews. The pyramid was the final product. But the real achievement was the society behind it. His son Khafre found an answer. Not a bigger pyramid, a cleverer one. He built slightly smaller and put it on higher ground, so that from the valley below, his is the one that looks taller. And then he did something nobody had ever done. Left over in the quarry below was a knuckle of poor limestone, too flawed to cut into blocks. Waste rock in the way. He had it carved into a lion with his own face. Khafre's son Menkaure built the third and smallest of the Great Giza pyramids. Even at reduced scale, it remains one of the largest structures ever built by human hands. 3 generations, 3 mountains of stone. For a while, it must have felt like Egypt could do anything. It couldn't. Every one of those pyramids had been paid for. Not in gold, in grain, in labor, in decades of an entire nation's surplus, poured into the desert and sealed under stone. And the bill was about to come due. The bill came due slowly, not as famine, not yet, as a quiet shift in ambition. The kings after the great pyramid builders shifted focus briefly, from pyramids to something almost as ambitious. Sun temples at a site north of Saqqara. Open-air complexes built to honor Ra, the sun god, whose priesthood was becoming one of the most powerful institutions in the kingdom. Near the end of this era, a king called Unas had something carved inside his pyramid that no one had ever put in writing before. Spells, hymns, instructions meant to guide a dead king safely into the afterlife. The pyramid texts, the oldest known religious writings anywhere in the world. Not every voice from this era belonged to a king. A career official named Weni carved his own life story into his tomb wall. Decades leading armies, managing quarries, judging disputes. A practical autobiography written for us 45 centuries early. A book of wisdom credited to a vizier named Ptahhotep proved so useful that Egyptian students were still copying it 1,000 years after he died. But the system was becoming more fragile. Each project drained the treasury and demanded years of coordinated national labor. Provincial governors, men appointed to manage Egypt's regions, grew steadily more powerful, more independent, more difficult for the king in Memphis to fully control. Then came Pepi II. He took the throne, reportedly as a young child, and reigned for something close to 90 years. Extraordinary longevity, and also, in hindsight, a slow-motion catastrophe. 90 years is long enough for central authority to quietly hollow itself out, while everyone assumes tomorrow will look like today. By the time Pepi II finally died, Egypt's climate was shifting too. The Nile floods, the entire basis of Egyptian agriculture, were becoming unreliable. A weakened crown, an unstable food supply. Provincial governors who no longer needed Memphis's permission to act. The old kingdom, the civilization that had built the pyramids, didn't fall in a single dramatic battle. It just stopped holding together. For roughly 150 years, Egypt fractured into competing regional powers, each claiming legitimacy, none able to enforce it nationwide. A scribe of this era, in a text called the Admonitions of Ippur, described the collapse in language that still reads like a nightmare, the poor becoming wealthy, the wealthy reduced to begging, officials murdered in the street, and, most disturbing to Egyptian ears, the sacred rhythm of the Nile itself seeming to run backward. Whether or not every detail is literally true, it tells you exactly how this era felt to the people living through it, like the end of something that was supposed to be permanent. Two rival power centers eventually emerged, one in the north, one in the south in a city called Thebes. And Thebes, a relatively minor provincial town up to this point, was about to become the launching point for Egypt's recovery. A Theban ruler spent decades fighting to reunify Egypt by force, finally succeeding around 2050 BC. Mentuhotep II. He didn't just restore the old system, he rebuilt it with the lessons of collapse built into its foundations. The kings who followed deliberately curbed the independent power of provincial governors. They professionalized the bureaucracy. They expanded Egypt's reach south into Nubia, securing access to gold mines and trade routes that would fund the kingdom for centuries. The very first king of this new, more centralized line understood exactly how fragile power could be and paid for that knowledge with his life. According to his own instructions, he was murdered in his own bedchamber by men from his own household. His advice to his heir was chillingly practical. Trust no one completely, not even the men closest to you. His successors took the warning seriously. A king pushed Egypt's southern border deep into Nubia. Building a chain of massive mud brick fortresses along the Nile's second cataract. The fortresses were proof enough. This era is often called Egypt's classical age. Not because of its monuments, though it built impressive ones, but because of its literature. Middle Kingdom scribes produced wisdom texts, poetry, and one genuinely gripping adventure story, The Tale of Sinuhe, ancient Egypt's first classic. Egyptian kings also built enormous irrigation projects around the Fayum, reclaiming farmland from marsh and desert. They had learned, in the most direct way possible, what happens when the Nile's generosity is taken for granted. For nearly 200 years, it worked. Egypt was stable, wealthy, and increasingly connected to the wider world through trade. But that connection eventually became a vulnerability. Over generations, foreign settlers from the Levant had been steadily moving into Egypt's eastern delta, initially as traders, laborers, and migrants. They became part of Egyptian society. They lived in Egyptian cities. They traded with Egyptians, and eventually, as central authority weakened, the population that had once been treated as foreign became powerful enough to create its own political center. Egyptian sources called them the Hyksos, rulers of foreign lands. The label wasn't kind, but the Hyksos brought something that changed Egyptian warfare permanently. The horse-drawn war chariot, composite bows, bronze weapons, new military tactics. For roughly a century, the Hyksos ruled northern Egypt from their own capital. Native Egyptian rulers held on in the south from Thebes. Two power centers, two governments, one divided country. A Theban king was the first to fight back seriously. He didn't live to finish the job. That fell to his younger brother. His name was Ahmose I. And he didn't just want the Hyksos gone. He wanted to make sure Egypt could never be threatened in the same way again. Around 1550 BC, Ahmose finished what his brother had started. He drove the Hyksos completely out of Egypt and pursued them back into Canaan itself. For the first time, Egyptian ambition didn't stop at Egypt's traditional borders. The lesson was blunt. Never again be caught without the deadliest weapons and tactics available. Egypt adopted the chariot. It professionalized a standing army, and it began looking outward, not just to defend its borders, but to control the land beyond them. This was the beginning of the New Kingdom, the era when Egypt stopped being merely a wealthy civilization along one river and became an empire. Ahmose's son held what his father had won. It was his grandson who decided holding the line wasn't enough. He led an army deep into Nubia, then turned north and marched all the way to the Euphrates River, farther from home than any Egyptian king before him. He planted a boundary stele on its banks. Egypt had become an empire, and empires create a new problem for their rulers. Once a country becomes wealthy because of conquest, it has to keep conquering, or at least keep convincing everyone around it that it can. That was the world she inherited. Serving as regent for her young stepson, she didn't quietly step aside once he came of age. She had herself crowned pharaoh in her own right, full royal titles, full royal regalia, including the ceremonial false beard that was simply part of what a king wore, regardless of who wore it. Rather than pursue military conquest to prove her legitimacy, Hatshepsut invested in trade and monuments. She sent a famous expedition to the land of Punt, returning with incense trees, exotic animals, gold and ivory. She had the expedition carved in loving detail onto the walls of her spectacular mortuary temple at Deir el-Bahari. She ruled for around 2 decades, one of the longest and most prosperous reigns of the New Kingdom. After her death, her stepson took full control, and where she had built, he conquered. Leading Egyptian forces on more than a dozen military campaigns into Canaan and Syria, including a legendary victory at Megiddo. He expanded Egypt's empire to its greatest territorial extent in its entire history. Modern historians sometimes call him Egypt's Napoleon. Given how much of the ancient Near East eventually answered to Thebes because of him, it isn't really an exaggeration. For roughly a century after Thutmose III, Egypt was, without serious rival, the wealthiest and most powerful nation on earth. 2 generations later, under Amenhotep III, that wealth became almost absurd. Massive building projects, elaborate diplomatic marriages, a level of luxury and international prestige Egypt had never quite reached before. We know how connected this world had become from the Amarna letters. Hundreds of clay tablets recording letters between the Egyptian court and foreign kings from Babylon, Assyria, and the Hittite lands. They addressed Pharaoh as brother and equal. Egypt was not just powerful. It was part of an international system of great powers. And then Amenhotep, the 3rd son, inherited the throne and decided the entire religious foundation of Egyptian civilization needed to be torn out and rebuilt from nothing. He declared that Egypt's traditional pantheon, Amun, Osiris, Isis, and the dozens of gods and priesthoods that had structured Egyptian life for over 1,000 years, would be replaced by worship of a single deity, the Aten, the literal disk of the sun. This wasn't a minor theological adjustment. Akhenaten abandoned Thebes entirely. He built a new capital in the desert, from nothing, on a stretch of virgin land on the Nile's east bank, roughly halfway between Thebes and Memphis. He defunded the powerful priesthood of Amun, which had grown almost as wealthy as the crown itself. Egyptian art changed style completely, more intimate, more naturalistic. The royal family appeared in surprisingly tender domestic scenes. His queen, Nefertiti, became one of the most visually iconic royal figures in ancient history. Surviving reliefs even show her in poses typically reserved for kings alone, smiting enemies, riding in a chariot, standing beside her husband as a political partner. But Akhenaten's religious revolution didn't survive him. It was too radical, too disruptive to too many powerful interests, and built too entirely around one man's personal conviction. Within a few years of his death, Egypt's priesthood and administration began systematically reversing everything he had built. The job of undoing it fell to a child. Akhenaten's young successor took the throne around the age of 8 or 9 under the name Tutankhaten. Advisors quickly steered him toward reversing his father's revolution completely. He changed his name to Tutankhamun, reopened the old temples, restored the old priesthoods, and abandoned Amarna for good. He died young, somewhere around 18 or 19. The cause is still debated. In life, he was a minor transitional king. In death, he became the most famous pharaoh who ever lived because his tomb escaped serious looting. When Howard Carter finally broke through its sealed doorway in 1922, he found something no one alive had ever seen: an ancient Egyptian royal burial almost completely intact. Room after room filled with gold, including the solid gold death mask that remains the single most recognizable image of ancient Egypt in the modern world. Erasure, as it turned out, was the best possible preservation. Seti I's son inherited a kingdom fully restored and hungry for glory again. And he wanted the entire world to know it. Early in his reign, Ramesses led Egyptian forces against the rival Hittite Empire at the Battle of Kadesh, one of the largest chariot battles in recorded history. Egyptian accounts describe it as a total personal victory. Hittite records told a rather different story, closer to a bloody, exhausting draw. Whatever actually happened on the battlefield, both empires spent the next 16 years locked in continued conflict until exhaustion pushed them towards something genuinely historic: the world's first known international peace treaty. Ramesses used his enormous wealth and 6-decade reign to build on a scale that rivaled the pyramid builders: Abu Simbel, Karnak, temples across Egypt, most still bearing his name. He fathered over 100 children. He outlived most of his own sons. When he finally died in his 80s, an entire generation of Egyptians had never known another pharaoh. Ramesses understood something that every ruler who wants to be remembered eventually discovers: the battlefield is temporary, the monument is not. A battle can be lost. A treaty can be forgotten. But a king who controls the walls of a temple can tell the story of his reign for thousands of years. Ramesses did not simply build temples, he built an argument. Every colossal statue said, "I was powerful." Every relief showed, "I was victorious." Every inscription repeated, "I was chosen by the gods." He did not merely rule Egypt, he made himself part of Egypt's physical environment. Egypt had been an empire for roughly 300 years. It felt permanent. It had less than a century left before everything started coming apart again. Around 1200 BC, something happened across the eastern Mediterranean that historians still don't fully understand. Major civilizations across the region fell apart within a few decades of each other. The Hittite Empire, Mycenaean Greece, powerful cities along the Levantine coast. Some disappeared permanently. Ancient Egyptian records blamed a mysterious coalition of seaborne raiders and migrants historians now call the Sea Peoples. Their exact origins remain debated. They may have been invaders, They may have been refugees fleeing collapse elsewhere. Perhaps both. A king fought them off in two major battles, on land and at sea. He won. Egypt, unlike its neighbors, did not collapse completely. But it never fully recovered its former strength. Constant warfare, economic strain, internal corruption, and an assassination conspiracy against Ramesses III himself. The empire built by Thutmose III and expanded by Ramesses II gradually lost its foreign territories. Royal authority at home began fragmenting once again. By around 1070 BC, Egypt had effectively split again, a northern kingdom in the delta and a separate power base in the south, where the high priests of Amun held authority that rivaled the throne itself. Libyan military families originally settled in Egypt generations earlier as soldiers and mercenaries, gradually rose to genuine political power. Foreign-born families were now producing pharaohs. The idea of centralized Egyptian authority had become fragile. One of these Libyan-descended kings launched a campaign into Canaan. The Bible remembers him by a different name, Shishak. Egyptian and biblical history, for one brief moment, describing the same event from two completely different points of view. For roughly 2 centuries, Egypt existed as a patchwork of competing regional power centers. Nominally unified, practically fractured, until a new dynasty arrived from the south. South of Egypt, along the Nile in what is now Sudan, lay the kingdom of Kush. A civilization deeply influenced by and deeply intertwined with Egypt for well over 1,000 years. Around 727 BC, a Kushite king marched north. He conquered a fractured Egypt and founded what historians call the 25th dynasty, Nubian pharaohs, ruling from Egypt's traditional seats of power, deeply devoted to restoring what they saw as authentic Egyptian religious practice. His successor ruled an empire stretching from deep in Nubia to the edge of the Near East. He appears in the biblical Book of Kings as well, an Egyptian Nubian pharaoh. Whose army allegedly helped check Assyrian ambitions during a siege of Jerusalem. It didn't last. The Assyrian Empire invaded Egypt. Thebes itself was sacked. The destruction was so severe that later cultures still remembered the fall of the city as a symbol of total devastation. Egypt regained independence one more time under native rulers based in the city of Sais. A native ruler based in Sais began reunifying the fractured country with the help of Greek and Carian mercenary soldiers. Egypt entered a genuine cultural revival. Artists deliberately looked backward to the Old Kingdom for inspiration. Egypt was trying to recover its own past. One of Psamtik's successors may have attempted something almost unbelievable. The Greek historian Herodotus claimed that Necho sent a fleet on a 3-year voyage that successfully circumnavigated Africa. Necho also began construction of a canal linking the Nile to the Red Sea. And at Megiddo, the same strategic crossroads where Thutmose III had fought nearly 900 years earlier, He clashed with and killed King Josiah of Judah. The old geography of Egyptian power was still shaping history. Then, in 525 BC, a new and far larger threat arrived: the Persian Empire. Persia conquered Egypt and absorbed it as a wealthy, resentful province. Egypt would spend much of the next 2 centuries either under Persian control or in rebellion against it. It briefly regained independence, then lost it again. The old cycle was becoming harder to break. By the time a young Macedonian king marched into Egypt in 332 BC, the Egyptians didn't resist him. They welcomed him as a liberator from Persian rule. And though he spent barely a matter of months in the country, he changed Egypt's future more permanently than almost anyone since Narmer himself. Alexander founded a new coastal city on Egypt's Mediterranean shore, Alexandria. It would become one of the greatest cities in the ancient world, a center of trade, scholarship, and science, home to the largest library the ancient world had ever assembled, and to a lighthouse counted among the 7 wonders of the world. Alexander died young in Babylon. His empire fractured immediately among his generals. One of them, a Macedonian, claimed Egypt for himself, and in a final act of legitimacy, hijacked Alexander's funeral procession and had his body interred in Alexandria. Alexander's tomb became the founding monument of a new dynasty. For nearly 300 years, Ptolemy's descendants ruled Egypt as pharaohs. Ethnically Greek, speaking Greek at court, worshiping Egyptian gods alongside their own, blending 2 cultures into something genuinely new. The Ptolemaic kings therefore faced a problem no previous foreign dynasty had faced in quite the same way. They had to be Greek kings in a Greek-speaking Mediterranean world, but they also had to be pharaohs in Egypt. In Alexandria, the court looked Greek. In the temples of Upper Egypt, the same kings appeared in the traditional form of pharaohs. They performed ancient rituals. They made offerings to Egyptian gods. They commissioned reliefs showing themselves wearing crowns that had already existed for thousands of years. The same ruler could be a Hellenistic monarch in Alexandria and an ancient Egyptian pharaoh in a temple hundreds of miles up the Nile. For nearly 3 centuries, the Ptolemies managed to rule 2 worlds at once. Behind the cultured surface, it was also one of the most viciously violent royal families in ancient history. Siblings marrying siblings to keep power inside the bloodline. Brothers murdering brothers. Mothers and sons locked in open civil war. More than one ruler assassinated by their own relatives. Most of them, notably, never bothered learning the Egyptian language at all. The last of them did. Cleopatra VII took the throne around 51 BC. She was fluent in Egyptian, along with several other languages, a rarity among her dynasty, and a real political asset in a kingdom whose ordinary people had lived under foreign-descended rulers. For 2.5 centuries, she was intelligent, politically ruthless when necessary, and a genuinely competent administrator. She steered Egypt through a devastating famine, reformed the currency, and personally oversaw state affairs. But her small, wealthy kingdom now existed entirely within the shadow of an unstoppable new power. Rising in the West, Rome. Cleopatra allied herself first with Julius Caesar. After his assassination, with Mark Antony. The relationships were genuine, by most surviving accounts. But they were also calculated attempts to keep Egypt independent by binding its fate directly to Rome's most powerful men. It worked for a while. In 31 BC, the combined forces of Cleopatra and Antony were decisively defeated at the naval battle of Actium by Octavian. The following year, with Roman forces closing in on Alexandria and Antony already dead by his own hand, Cleopatra chose to end her own life, rather than be paraded through Rome as a conquered trophy. She was Egypt's last pharaoh. Every ruler after her would answer to Rome. Rome didn't govern Egypt like an ordinary province. It was too valuable for that. Egypt's grain harvests, shipped across the Mediterranean, fed the city of Rome itself. Egypt was the empire's breadbasket. The province was placed under the personal control of the emperor himself. No ambitious Roman aristocrat was allowed to control Egypt's wealth independently. Egyptian religion, meanwhile, didn't just survive Roman rule. It spread because of it. The cult of Isis, carried by soldiers, merchants, and travelers, took root across the Roman world. Temples to her appeared as far away as Britain and the Rhine frontier of Germany. An ancient Egyptian goddess was being worshipped by people who would never see the Nile. For nearly 4 centuries, Egyptian temples continued operating. Egyptian priests continued their rituals. Egyptian gods continued receiving worship, but the world around them was changing. Christianity spread across the Roman Empire. Eventually, it became the empire's official religion. Egypt's ancient temples faced growing pressure, declining funding, and outright closure. The old hieroglyphic writing system, once the sacred language of gods and kings, gradually fell out of active use. Fewer priests understood it with every generation, until eventually, no one could read it at all. The last known hieroglyphic inscription at the Temple of Philae is dated to 394 AD. The temple itself was formally closed under the Byzantine Emperor Justinian in 551 AD. 3,000 years of continuous religious and cultural tradition went quiet. But the end of ancient Egypt was not a single moment. There was no final day when someone could stand beside the Nile and say, "Egypt is over." The end happened slowly. A temple closed. A priest died. A ceremony was performed for the last time. A language became less familiar to the next generation. A symbol that had once been obvious became mysterious. And eventually, the civilization was still physically there. The temples were still standing. The tombs were still buried. The statues were still watching the horizon. But the people who could explain what they meant were gone. Egypt did not vanish. It became silent. For over 1,000 years, no living person on Earth could read a single hieroglyph. Egypt's own writing system became a total mystery. The monuments remained. The language disappeared. Then, in 1799, a group of French soldiers discovered a stone near the town of Rosetta. The same royal decree had been written in 3 scripts: hieroglyphs, a simplified Egyptian script, and Greek. It took a French scholar years of obsessive work to finally crack the code. In 1822, ancient Egyptian could be read again for the first time in over 1,000 years. Only then could Egypt's own voice finally be heard again. Its kings, its priests, its scribes, its people. Not through the words of Greek historians, not through the accounts of Roman conquerors, but through the words Egyptians themselves had carved into their own monuments. 3,000 years of history, over 300 pharaohs. Civilization that united, collapsed, and rebuilt itself again and again. So long that its own people eventually forgot their own beginning. And so thoroughly silenced at its end that even its language had to be rediscovered like a lost artifact. The pyramids are still standing. The temples, most of them, are still standing. The names of the men and women who built and ruled this civilization are, once again, Narmer's original idea, one crown holding 2 lands together, outlasted the language it was written in, outlasted the religion that justified it, and outlasted, by nearly 3,000 years, absolutely everyone who ever doubted it would work.